Welcome back, everybody. Ready to dive into deep dive number 8.
8 already. Wow, time flies.
I know, right? And this one, oh boy, this one takes us all the way to Hope Mills, North Carolina. We're going to try to untangle the case of Edwardine Williams. She was a truck driver, a mom, just all around seems like a really beloved person from what we're going to learn.
Yeah, and tragically, her life was cut short just days after her 50th birthday back in November of 2010.
Yeah. And what I think is really interesting about this one is that we're working with video excerpts from a Discovery Channel documentary. So we get to actually see and hear the family's reactions and emotions as this whole investigation unfolds.
It's definitely different than just reading a police report or,
Yeah.
just a written account. You really get to experience the raw
Yep.
emotion, yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So to kind of set the stage here, Edwardine disappears the week after Thanksgiving. Her car is found abandoned a week later, and then 2 weeks after that, they discover her body. So right from the start, it's like, wait, what is going on here? Nothing really adds up.
No, the timeline it's definitely got some holes in it, and there's conflicting stories, especially when you look at what her brother Robert is saying compared to what her son Terry is saying. Like, Robert waited a whole week before even reporting Edwardine missing. That's odd.
Yeah, that's a huge red flag, right? And then you have Terry, who lived with Edwardine. But every time he tells the story about her plans the night she vanished, it's like a slightly different story each time, almost like he's, I don't know, trying to remember what he's supposed to say.
Yeah, it's almost like everyone close to her has secrets, right? Like they're all holding something back.
Exactly. So we've got this whole web of relationships and potential motives, and we have to try and figure out, who could have done it. I mean, in addition to Robert and Terry, there's also Wayne Black. He was a truck driver. He was pretty close with Edwardine. He even took her to a concert the night before she disappeared. And we also can't forget about Edwardine's ex-husband. They had a history of some pretty big conflicts.
Yeah. It seems like the police had a lot of different leads to follow. It's like every time you think you're zeroing in on someone, something else pops up and makes you question everything. And then you start getting into the evidence, and that's when things start to get really unsettling. Like the fact that her purse was found tied to a tree near her car, and it had a decent amount of cash still inside.
It just seems like if robbery was the motive, why leave the money? It
Yeah.
starts to feel a lot more personal.
Right, exactly. And then you add in the autopsy results, and it gets a lot more complicated. Edwardine was strangled. They found fractures in her hyoid bone and her thyroid cartilage. This wasn't just some random act of violence. This was very deliberate.
Very chilling stuff.
Hmm.
Makes you think, about the people in Edwardine's life, and were any of them harboring that kind of anger, that kind of resentment?
Mm-hmm.
It's really unsettling to think about, especially when you learn from Edwardine's college advisor that she'd been confiding in her about some concerns about Terry moving back home.
Yeah, and that piece of information just kind of throws a whole other wrench into things. Because if Edwardine was already having second thoughts about Terry being around, then that definitely adds a whole new layer to his potential involvement. You know what I mean?
Definitely. It's like she was picking up on something, sensing some tension there maybe.
Yeah.
And then you have Terry's ex-wife. She does not hold back. She
Yeah.
describes him as possessive and violent. She even mentions times when he choked her.
It's scary, and it's starting to paint a really disturbing picture of Terry. And then, to top it all off, the police find Terry burning some of Edwardine's things, like even things that belong to Michael, Edwardine's deceased husband.
Yeah.
That is strange. I mean, why would he burn those specific items? You really have to wonder if there's some deep-seated resentment there.
It really feels like we're starting to understand what was going on in Terry's mind, and it's not good.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that really nails it. The piece of evidence that just blows the whole case wide open. It's something so small you almost wouldn't think twice about it.
Yeah.
A Betty Boop keychain.
Oh, yeah, the keychain. It's like straight out of a detective novel. Remember how earlier Tabitha, Edwardine's daughter, mentioned that her mom always kept this specific Betty Boop keychain on her car keys?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I thought it was just like a little detail about Edwardine, It's part of who she was.
Yeah, but get this. The police find a Betty Boop keychain that matches that one in Edwardine's house. So the question is, who would have known about that keychain and had the opportunity to bring it back to the house?
It would have to be someone who knew Edwardine really well, someone who knew her routines, who had access to her keys. It's like all the signs are pointing straight to Terry.
Exactly. That little keychain, it becomes the smoking gun. It's like the final piece of the puzzle that connects him directly to what happened.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the smallest details are the most important in these investigations. And in this case, that little keychain helped bring Edwardine's killer to justice.
It's just amazing to me how something like a keychain, a little thing like that can bring a whole case crashing down. But I want to go back to Terry and how he reacted when they finally arrested him. The initial charge was second-degree murder, and his response, ugh, it was chilling.
I know, I remember watching that part, and it was like, whoa. He actually said something like, well, at least it's not first degree. It was so matter of fact. You could tell he knew the difference legally, but there was just zero remorse for what he had done to his own mother.
And it's like that complete lack of remorse continues as the case moves forward. He pleads not guilty and then starts trying to throw out these wild accusations, trying to deflect the blame onto someone else.
Yeah, he tried to spin this story about Edwardine having all these secret boyfriends that nobody knew about, implying that one of them must have been the killer. Like, oh, come on, really?
It's so ridiculous. And if you remember, all of her friends and family said Edwardine was very open about her life. She wasn't seeing anyone new. And even if she was, she would have told her friends about it. It was just so desperate.
So transparent. He was grasping at straws, trying to create this doubt when really there wasn't any.
Yeah, he tried to play the victim too, but that completely falls apart when you consider what we learned from Edwardine's college advisor and Terry's ex-wife. They both describe a guy who was controlling and quick to anger, someone Edwardine was actively trying to get away from.
Yeah, his actions spoke volumes, louder than any words he can say. And because of that, a grand jury ended up indicting him, and they upgraded the charges to first-degree murder. It's just all around a horrible situation, and you really feel for everyone involved.
You really do. And the documentary did a really great job of showing how Edwardine's daughters were feeling throughout the trial. They wanted justice for their mom, but at the same time, they were losing their brother, too.
It's just an impossible situation to be in.
Hmm.
Seeking justice while also mourning the loss of a family member who's responsible for all the pain.
Oh, absolutely. It's just heartbreaking. And the worst part is, there are no winners. Violence like this, it impacts everyone, leaving scars that never really go away.
You're so right. But amidst all of the darkness, there are these moments of hope and strength. The community, they really rallied around Edwardine's daughters, supporting them through everything.
That's so important. And Edwardine's friends, too. Especially Wayne Black. He never wavered, even when he was considered a suspect himself. He knew Edwardine, he knew her character, and he defended her every step of the way.
It really shows how much she meant to people. Even though her life was cut short, her memory lives on.
And that's what's important. They're celebrating her life and not letting this tragedy define her. But this case really makes you think about the importance of communication within families and how if we don't deal with conflict, it can have really devastating consequences.
Absolutely. I mean, what if there had been more honesty and openness? What if Terry had felt like he could actually talk about his feelings? Maybe things would have been different. Maybe it wouldn't have gotten to this point.
That's a tough question. But it does make you wonder if things could have changed if there had been more support, like maybe anger management or some kind of family counseling. It's a sobering thought. It really makes you realize that as a society, we need to do more to support families who are struggling.
Yeah, it's so important. And it also makes me think back to that keychain, that little detail that turned out to be so significant. It reminds us to pay attention. Sometimes the truth can be found in the most unexpected places.
Right. Sometimes the smallest details can completely change everything. And it's a good lesson for all of us, not just in these types of investigations, but in our own lives. We need to look beyond the surface, pay attention to those little cues, the things that aren't being said.
Yeah, it's like being more aware of the world around us, to look for those hidden meanings, the emotions that are driving things.
Exactly. And it's also about creating safe spaces where people can be open and honest. We need to foster empathy and understanding and remember that everyone has their own story.
Yeah, it's really about like taking the time to really see people and hear them. And I think that starts with just being present, putting our phones down, really listening to what the other person is saying instead of just waiting for our turn to talk.
It's hard though, isn't it? Like in today's world, we're so bombarded with everything. Social media, work emails, there's always something vying for our attention.
It is, yeah. But that's exactly why it's so important to be intentional about it, to make a conscious effort to focus on the person in front of you. That's where active listening comes in.
Right, active listening. So it's not just about hearing the words, but actually absorbing them and paying attention to the other stuff too, like tone of voice, body language, all those things. Exactly. It's about picking up on the subtle cues, the things that aren't being said out loud. And sometimes it means asking questions, digging a little deeper when something feels off, or if you think the person might be holding back.
Yeah, and creating a space where they feel safe enough to open up. To be honest, even if it's hard. I mean, that's what really gets me about Edwardine's story. What if things had been different in her family? What if Terry had felt like he could actually tell them how he was feeling? Maybe all this pain could have been avoided.
It's a really tough question, and we'll never know for sure. But it does highlight how important it is to have those open lines of communication and to seek help when you need it.
I think sometimes people are afraid to ask for help, like it's a sign of weakness or something.
But it's not at all. It takes courage to admit that you need help, whether it's therapy, support groups, or just talking to someone you trust. It's a sign of strength.
I think that's maybe the biggest takeaway from Edwardine's story. That no matter how bad things get, there's always hope. There's always a chance for healing and growth.
Yeah. And look at her daughters. They are the definition of resilience. They could have easily let anger and bitterness consume them, but they chose to focus on the positive, to remember Edwardine for the amazing woman she was.
It's inspiring. They're choosing to rebuild their lives and honor Edwardine's memory. It just goes to show, even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can overcome anything.
This whole deep dive, it's been a lot. We've covered some really tough stuff, but I think it's so important to talk about these things, to understand the complexities of family dynamics, the consequences of conflict, but also to remember the power of love and resilience.
I agree. And Edwardine's story, it's definitely one that stays with you. It makes you think and hopefully makes you want to be better, to do better, to be more present, more understanding, more compassionate.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thank you so much for being here, for helping us unpack all of this.
Yeah.
And everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.